Alright, in this walkthrough, I'm going to walk you through the process of creating a simple Twitter client. Not only is this going to be a walkthrough for a Twitter client, but it's also an example of how to build any OAuth application. So here are the user stories that we're going to cover. We're going to start off with just the simple OAuth login flow, which just has the login button. Then after you're authenticated, we're going to fetch the last 25 tweets. The last two items were not going to be covered in this walkthrough, but it's going to be spec'd to compose a tweet and to save it. Now the tweet view is gonna look just like this. It's just gonna have your user profile image, the username, and the body of the tweet, and we're just gonna have this all in a list view. So fairly straightforward UI. Before we get started with actually building, I'm gonna walk you through the process of creating the application on Twitter. So this is required for any Twitter application or any OAuth application. We're just going to need to first go to their web portal and enter our details here. So just choose whatever app name that you want here. It does have to be unique in the Twitter system, but use kind of the try some stuff and see what works. Then enter in a description here. The website here is required, but it can be any value. So I'm just going to use yahoo.com. Similarly, the callback URL has to have some value. This value is actually ignored. So all it has to do is be non-null, and it has to be a valid web URL. I'm going to click OK to accept the terms, and then enter in the CAPTCHA. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to go to the settings area and modify a few more things. So I'm going to go scroll down to the application type, and these are my default permissions. I have read and write and access, direct messages, and so for my client I'm just going to select the highest level, read, write, and access direct messages. Then after I do that, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to select allow this application to be used to sign in with Twitter. That's going to allow me to access a new endpoint, and then I'm going to update these settings. Then I'm going to go to my details here, and I'm going to point out a few things that we're going to need. So the key things here are the consumer key and the consumer secret, and then these three request and authorize and access URLs, which are required for the authentication process. So next, we're going to go to the REST API v1.1 documentation. And I'm going to point out the endpoint that we're going to be using, which is the home timeline here. So home timeline just has the tweets of all of my friends. So if we click on that, then the things that we're going to note here are the resource URL, then all of the required parameters. Most of these are optional actually, and then finally what our sample response might look like. And we can note that this thing even has embedded users in it. Okay, so in order to get started, we're going to go to github.com/thecodepath and pick the REST client template project. So this is a really simple project that is meant to be a prototype for any kind of REST client, whether it's Flickr, Tumblr, Twitter, or whatever. So in order to get this, instead of git cloning it, I'm actually going to go and I'm going to use the zip link right here to download the zip file. That way it won't have the git history of the REST client template, and I'll be able to create a fresh git project from it. So after it's downloaded that, I'm just going to unzip that, and I'm going to put it onto my my desktop for now. Okay, so I'm going to open up Eclipse and import it now into my workspace. So it's an Android application, so I'm going to select that one. Then I'm going to browse and navigate to where I copied it, which was my desktop. Rename the project so that it's not called login activity. And I'm going to choose the option to copy the project into the workspace. That means that I can actually delete the REST client template from my desktop once this process is complete. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to wait for the import to happen, which takes just a moment. Okay, now it's come in. And I have to go through and I rename these things to begin to transform it into the client that I want. So instead of login activity, I'm just going to refactor this. And in addition to this, I'm going to change my package names. So instead of REST client template, I'm going to change it to be my Twitter app. And when I do this, I'll make sure I'm going to select the checkbox to rename the sub packages. Okay, so now that I've started renaming that, next I just want to make sure that everything in my Android manifest is set. So let me look at the raw view. Yeah, so my package here, I do want to change that from REST client template to be my Twitter app. Update my launch configuration, and then in my login activity, I do need to fix an import that's happened that's failed because of my package name change. So just this resource R. So if I just do Command Shift O, it'll clean up the imports. It'll delete that unknown import. Okay, so I think we're all set here. Yep, looks good. So a couple more renamings. One, I'm going to take this REST client and I'm going to rename it to my Twitter client. Now, every API that you're going to integrate with is going to have a corresponding client. So you can have, and an important thing to note is that you could have more than one client if you have more than one API. So you one project might have a Flickr client, might have a Twitter client, might have a Tumblr client if you're doing a mashup here. This file that I'm renaming here is a singleton application. So in Android, most activities are standalone. They're not meant to interact with other activities. And so you're going to have a singleton app. Now this is the libs area that has all of the libraries that we're importing. So Scribe is the OAuth library. It's a popular third-party implementation of an OAuth client. We've also wrapped up OAuth and added a few simple utils of our own. Then we've also imported the Universal Image Loader and the Android Async HTTP libraries to provide for asynchronous image loading as well as to easily create asynchronous requests. Okay, so we got our libs, we went and looked at our Android manifest, we've refactored and renamed the various packages so that it's a Twitter client. So now let's go into login activity. And login activity is actually a pretty simple method, pretty simple activity for right now. So let's go see what the layout looks like. So if we go to Res Layout, what we're going to see is just a simple button here. And that's just that splash screen that every application kind of starts off with, that you might have your kind of your branding and then your login to Twitter. So it's just going to be, it's just going to call a particular, all we need to do in the login activities to have the on-click handler. So what this does is, you notice that this login activity extends OAuth login activity. And what this is it wraps the Scribe authentication process so that it simplifies it into two main steps. So first, all we have to do is call getClient.connect. That will open up the web view, handle all of the early parts of the OAuth authentication process. And then when the user comes back, then it's going to either call the onLogin success method if the user has successfully or has agreed to grant your application permissions or it's going to say call all login failure if there's maybe been a network failure or if they refuse to give kind of permissions. So let's try running that. Well, actually, before we do that, let's come to the Twitter client here, and we actually need to modify a few things. So you notice that this Twitter client is actually configured to work with Flickr for right now. So we need to change it to work with the Twitter API. This Twitter API is a built-in class that comes with Scribe. If you want to work with an API, it's actually pretty simple. You just have to note these 3 URLs. And so the Scribe class, all it does is it has 3 or 4 methods, which includes those URLs. Now we have to change the base URL. So this REST URL, which is configured for Flickr, we actually need to go and figure out what it is for Twitter. So if you go back to the Twitter documentation and look at the endpoint that we're interested in. So up here we can see that the resource URL includes this base URL part, and that's going to be common for all of the resources here. So if I copy that, paste that there, then the OAuth base client will know how to form the requests. Now I just have to copy in my REST consumer key, and paste it there, and then copy in my REST consumer secret. So this is going to be the same process for any kind of OAuth API client, Twitter, Tumblr, Flickr, or whatever. Now the final key aspect of configuration is to set the callback URL. This is actually arbitrary. Now I'm going to set it to my Twitter app for now, and just take a note of this callback address. So now I'm going to click Run As. So while this is waiting, while I'm waiting for my emulator to launch, I'm actually going to implement the method that we need to interact with the home timeline. So each client is actually a very lightweight wrapper. All it does is, aside from having these 5 basic kind of OAuth parameters, you're going to have one method for every endpoint that you want to interact with. So in this case, we have the Flickr endpoint right now, which is kind of useless and in fact won't work for the Twitter client, but I'm going to add the get home timeline endpoint. So it's going to take in an async HTTP response handler, which has the on success and on failure methods. And then I'm going to create the URL based off of the documentation. So I'm just going to pull this statuses/hometimeline.json. The whole thing is important, including the .json, so that's part of the resource URL. And I'm going to wrap that up into the get API URL method. What that does is it kind of automatically puts the base URL with the resource URL. So in this case, actually I don't need the request params because it's not going to have anything. So client.get is the HTTP method. I can also have post, put, delete if there's other types of methods. So in this case, it's going to be a get though. Then I'm passing the URL null for no parameters, and I'm going to chain through the handler. And that's it. So most methods in here are going to be as simple as this. The only maybe more complex ones are if I want to upload an image, so it has to be a post that's a multi-part HTTP request. So I'm going to need to prepare the image, but other than that, it's pretty much as simple as this. So I'm going to have one method per endpoint. So let's see what happened here. Okay, so because the emulator took a long time to launch, what I usually like to do is I like to make sure that it got connected. So I have to open up my DDMS perspective here. I can see that it's not connected. So in order to make sure that it's connected, what you want to do is you want to click this pull down arrow here and then hit reset ADB. You can ignore this ADB failed to restart error. That doesn't mean anything. And about after 10 or 11 attempts, usually the device appears here, at least for my computer. So if I do that, I want to monitor the logcat, and now my emulator is successfully connected to my Eclipse instance. So go home, and then let's try to run this again. I just want to make sure that it's the right instance. All right, so let's note that my Twitter app URL and try logging in. So here's the app that I created earlier. I'm going to authorize it. And then I noticed that it tried to redirect to this website, oauth://my Twitter app. And that's the same URL that was specified in this callback URL. It has nothing to do with the callback URL that was specified in the web page for Twitter. So in order to fix this, what I need to do is I need to tell Android that this application can handle URLs of this type. So that when the Twitter application returns, it knows where to go. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my Android manifest. There's already a placeholder for the intent filter here, but it just needs to be modified so that it matches the scheme that we requested here. So instead of OAuth CP_REST, it's going to be OAuth my Twitter app. Okay, great. So let's go home here again and then rerun it and see what happens. So what I'm expecting to happen, or I'm hoping to happen, is now after I log in, it can successfully come back to my login app, which it did. So that actually is good. That actually means that it worked. So note the time here, 101 to 101. That absolutely needs to match in order for OAuth to work. Sometimes your emulator can get out of sync if you put it in standby. So you just need to make sure that happens. Otherwise, you won't get the request URL. So in order to kind of see what's going on here, to see if I'm really getting the onLogin success method, I'm going to create a new activity, which is going to be my timeline activity. So this is just a really simple layout. And then instead of launching the photos activity, then I'm going to uncomment this out and launch the timeline activity. So this is going to be the feed that the feed of custom tweets that we're going to be building today. So just run that, and then let's verify that this happens. And so you can see that it's automatically switched to the timeline activity and sent it so quickly that we don't even see the login activity, which is kind of the behavior that we want. So if they're coming back and they've already logged in, then they should just immediately go back to the timeline activity. So next, what we want to do is actually download tweets. So if we open up our singleton, what we can see here is that we have access to the Twitter client, and that's what we're going to use by going to because each activity is pretty standalone, and so we are going to want to we might need to access this Twitter client from anywhere. So I can access from timeline activity, I can access to my compose activity, I can always get a handle for that object. So now if I go to onCreate, if I just access my Twitter app, then I can get the client here, and then I can make the request to the timeline. So this is the method that we just created, get home timeline. And instead of an async HTTP response handler, I'm going to pass in a JSON HTTP response handler, which will automatically take the response, and before it calls my callbacks, it's going to try to deserialize the string into JSON. So the key here is that I have to notice that it's a JSON array because that's going to depend on my response here. So if it didn't have a JSON array, then I might have had to select the JSON object here. So just add the debug and let's just demonstrate that it works here, and then just import my log file. So now if I run this, then I can see that in my logcat I have this long JSON string, and it has all of the tweets, the contributors, the text, and so on. So that's convenient, and we're pretty far along now. We actually have the data, but this object is not that easy to work with. You can imagine that you can call get on the JSON array to get the JSON object, and then you have to kind of peel out the relevant property, and there may be a lot of them, and there may be nested objects as well. And so very quickly your code is going to get riddled with kind of JSON object navigation. So it's much more convenient to create a custom ORM, a custom model that wraps each of these things so that we can work with it a little bit easier. So in order to do that, I'm going to kind of demonstrate how we've done it in another application that I've uploaded. So if you go to github.com/thecodepAth, then you can access another project in the simple Twitter client. So this is actually the app that we're building right now. And if you go to the models area, then you can see that there's a if you go to the models area, you can see that there's a base model here. So if you go to base model, then what we're looking at is a very lightweight wrapper. All it has is this underlying JSON object. And then it has these kind of get string and get long and get in methods that just chain through to the JSON object, catching the exceptions. So essentially, base model is JSON object, but it just has these convenient wrappers that we can use. So our models are actually going to extend base model. So first, let's change to raw mode, and let's just copy this so that we can bring it into our project. So just create a couple new classes here. One of them is going to be base model. So if we type in here base object, well, actually I called it base, yeah, I'm sorry, base model. And just paste in what we've copied before. So this is just base model equals JSON object, essentially. Very lightweight still. This is not a really fancy ORM. Then I'm going to create two more classes, tweet and user. So once I've done that, I want to extend from base model. And then I want to come back to GitHub and kind of steal those implementations as well. But before I do that, let's kind of take a look what's inside. So I have all of the accessors for all of the JSON key value pairs. So this allows me to kind of use the method names instead of knowing the properties. So lets me do some kind of, it's easier to implement to use these methods. The other thing that it does is it implements this static method from JSON. So this is available off of the user class, and it takes in a JSON object. And all this method does is it constructs my user and sets the JSON object. So let me copy this. So not edit, but if I go back to user and I go to the raw mode, this will be a little bit easier to copy. So let's pull that into our class as well. So again, this is from the simple tweet project from the CodePath organization. So That's done. Now I want to do the same thing for tweet. Switch to raw mode again, and then just copy this. So what we want to note is that this again provides the same um, thing as user, which is it kind of gives me all of the properties. Text is kind of the main status one. And then the from JSON, similarly, it just kind of sets the JSON object. But it also plucks out the embedded user, creates the user from that JSON object. That's the only JSON object that's going to be in tweet. And then it calls from JSON to kind of create the first class user object and sets the user property of the tweet. Then there's one more special one for tweet, which it also is able to handle a JSON array. All that does is it iterates through the JSON array, calling from JSON off of the tweet to give us ultimately the array list of tweets. So with this code, we're able to come back to timeline activity, and instead of working with these JSON array of tweets, our ultimate goal is we want to be able to have an array list of tweets. So what we can do is we can use the factory method, the static method we've created off of the tweet class, in order to give us our array list of tweet. So after we do this, then we just have to fix our imports so that we pull in the array list and tweet. But then we can work with the tweet object now instead of a JSON object. So the next thing that we want to do is that we want to create our custom list view. So in order to create a custom list view, we're going to need to create our own adapter. So every time you create a custom list view, you're going to need two elements. You're going to need to create your list view object here. So let's just delete that, and let's create a little room for ourselves here, and let's kind of pull a list view in here. So switching back to the XML, I'm going to kind of delete this padding that we don't want. We want it flush against the sides and top. I'm going to make the height match parent, because I want it to be full height. And then I'm going to change the ID of it to LV tweets, just so that's a little bit more semantic. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is I also need the XML for each individual row that's going to have that profile picture, the name, the tweet, text. And so coming back to layout here, I'm going to create a new XML file and call it tweet item. So I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to go to GitHub, and I'm going to take the one that's already implemented in simple Twitter client. You can feel free to do the same thing. So let's see here. The correct path is actually to go back all the way to the top, go to resources, and then go to layout, and then the tweet item. So here we have the layout, linear layout, and then the one image view, and then the other elements of the tweet, which are the name and the body. So pretty simple to create manually. I'm actually going to switch back to the raw mode, so it's kind of an easier copy. Copy that, and then come back to Eclipse, and then paste that into the XML here. So this is something that we could have done manually pretty easily, but just for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to paste it in for now. So let's see. The next thing that we have to do is, so we created the list view, we've created the custom layout, we have the tweets. Now we need to actually create our custom adapter. So if we come in here and we create a new Android activity, we create a new just a new class, the tweets adapter, and we want to just drag this into the package that we all of our other things are in, and then we just need to extend the array adapter here. So array adapter is the most commonly used adapter for list view. Array adapter, if we want to override it, then we need to extend it. If we want, then we need to implement two methods. One is the constructor, and the other is getView. So I'm actually going to pull that from the project here as well. So it's called the tweets adapter, and then the first thing I'll copy over is just the constructor. The key thing with the constructor is that it has the context and it has the list of tweets. And notice that the tweets we called and chained in through to our super. And that's important because that allows the array adapter to implement all of the helper methods that it has to work with the underlying collection. Because remember, the adapters have a high degree of awareness of the actual data that it uses. Now the second role of the adapter is to override the getView. So let's copy that in as well. So fix our imports, then we want to note a few things here. So one is, what is this convert view? This convert view is views that it can reuse. So the list view, as I'm scrolling up and down, as views are getting dumped off the top of the pile here, they're actually getting placed and reused because of memory considerations, and as new things are coming in, then those views already actually exist. So I don't need to inflate a new one. If that view is null, then the important thing to note is this r.layout.tweet item. That's the layout file that we specified just a second ago, and that's going to give us our tweets. Then we're going to get our ask our adapter for the tweet at the position that we're currently trying to populate. Get the profile image, and then this image loader, which is really convenient, allows us to asynchronously load from the network and then set the image view. So this is provided by Universal Image Loader, which is a third-party library. So all it requires is the URL and then the ultimate image view that you want to set the bitmap for. Finally, we have the actual name and then the body of the tweet. So the name of the user and then the body of their message. So with this, then we have that's all we need to do in order to create a custom adapter. And so let's kind of wire it up now. So we have our tweets, and then we need a handle to our list view. So remember that we called it LV tweets in our XML file. So we're going to leverage the find view by ID, and then the appropriate ID, which is just going to be LV tweets. Then if we just fix our imports by doing Command-Shift-O, we can then create a new adapter. So this adapter is the thing that is going to give us all of our custom views and knows how to work with tweets. So we want to do get base context here. Remember that we're in the inner class here, so normally you can't use this anymore because this refers to the inner class. So this will give us the outer class, and then we pass in our tweets. And then finally, we set the adapter on LV tweets to kind of glue it all together. Clean up the debug line that we don't need anymore, and then let's give it a run. So that's all there is to it. We have here a list view of tweets that was kind of pulled in from our REST client and populated via our custom views. So if you want to move on and kind of extend this further, then you can add the compose button here and then go to your menu and add it there. So you can add the click handlers for the menu to launch the compose activity. And then you can add a post in here to just like we did for the home timeline. So we come back to Twitter, and then we need to find the endpoint that we're interested in to create a compose. In this case, it's going to be here in the tweet section, post statuses update. So that's it for this walkthrough. Thanks for watching.